Boy, Dennis, you look like you're ready for takeoff or something. Dude,
Yep, this is
it's
my
the,
gamer's headset.
oh, and the chair looks like you're in a rocket ship or something, ready to go.
It served me well the past 10 months.
Yeah, comfortable, huh?
Dennis, whenever you're ready, you'll kick us off.
Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll just wait one more moment and then we'll go ahead and get into it.
Mm. Somebody's asking about Vice Chancellor Haynes. If VC Haynes, if this is 2DE, his, no, he's not. He is not.
Okay, why don't we'll go ahead and just begin to get started. So hi, good evening everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for the Black Leadership Alliance Council at the University of California, aka Black at UC, their inaugural first event. And we're very excited to be able to present this to you. My name's Dennis McIver. I'm one of the co-founders of Black at UC. I work at UC Riverside, where I also serve as president of our staff assembly, as well as past chair of our Black Faculty and Staff Association. So we'll take a moment and I'll introduce my colleague, Sharon.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Andrus. I am the other co-founder for Black at UC. And like Dennis said, we're really excited to have you here with us for our inaugural event. I'm a recent transplant to UC Berkeley, but I came from UC Davis, where I was involved with the African American Faculty and Staff Association there at Health. I was the chair for 4 years. And served on various committees. And now I am an officer of the Council of UC Staff Assemblies and doing some system-wide work around policing. And so we will do a quick little Zoom protocol, and then we'll get into our panel introductions.
And to give a quick walkthrough of protocol, this is using the webinar function. And as a result, we have the ability to make use of specific technology. And in this case, we will be using the Q&A function. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to place them in the Q&A function. That will allow us to be able to organize them and ensure that they're answered as efficiently as possible. The other thing I should add is that because it's a webinar function, you will not have to be on camera, because I know there's certain exhaustion that comes with that. So you have nothing to worry about. You wouldn't be on camera. It will just be our lovely faces. And so that's all you need to know for now, but we're really excited to be able to have this conversation with you.
All right, so we'll get to our extremely distinguished panel that we have here with us this evening. So we have Dr. Ruth Shim, who is the Luke and Grace Kim Professor in Cultural Psychiatry in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and Associate Dean of Diverse and Inclusive Education at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Shim has received numerous honors and awards, including the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine Fellowship, Distinguished Fellow, American Psychiatric Association, and Teacher of the Year, Morehouse School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. In addition, she is co-editor of the book, The Social Determinants of Mental Health. We also have, there he is, Dr. Douglas Haynes, who is the inaugural Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, which is the University of California, Irvine's Chief Diversity Officer, and he's a professor of history. Among his principal publications are Imperial Medicine, Patrick Manson and the Conquest of Tropical Disease, and Fit to Practice, Empire, Race, Gender, and the Making of British Medicine. We also have Dr. Christina Baker, who is an associate professor in the Department of History and Critical Race and Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Merced. Her work centers on the social construction and ideologies of race and gender, with an emphasis on Black feminist theory and praxis, media representation of Blackness, and experiences of women of color in film, media, higher education, and other social institutions. And she is the author of Contemporary Black Women Filmmakers and the Art of Resistance. And finally, we have Dr. Jan Marie Garcia, who is an Associate Health Sciences Clinical Professor at the Betty Irene Moore School of Nursing and the Director of Social Justice and Immersive Learning, Office of Health, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion at the University of California, Davis. Along with Melanie Turvalon, Dr. Marie Garcia coined and developed the concept of cultural humility in her publication, Cultural Humility versus Cultural Competency, a critical distinction in defining physician training outcomes in multicultural education. She was recently named the City of Davis, California's 2021 Citizen of the Year for her work in establishing a race and social justice class in collaboration with Davis Senior High School that meets the U.S. History graduation requirements. We will start this evening's roundtable off with our panel taking a quick look back at the year that was 2020. And don't be shy, panel.
Otherwise, we will pick someone.
2020 was a year.
I'll take a bite at this. Good evening, everyone. I think 2020, at least from my vantage point, from UC Irvine, was both combines change and continuity. There was a lot of change that was visible in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and the mass protests, both locally across the state and the country and the world. And it appeared to be a real moment of change that hasn't been fulfilled, I think. And that's some of the continuity. One of the common chants was this time is different. I don't know who it was different for, because we know that there were killings both before George Floyd and after George Floyd. Very little accountability. I guess the thing that had changed in this context that I sort of see is the willingness of large organizations like universities to begin to do things a little differently, including how people message, which often is seen as fairly trivial, but to name things such as systemic racism, to begin to sort of see the campus, the university, as an engine of change instead of reinforcing the status quo. And so I guess the word that I use to define 2021 is thriving, that we need to organize our campuses so that Black people can thrive. And that will require a whole university effort and not just the usual suspects.
So I can follow Dr. Haynes if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Great. I wanted to, so first of all, I definitely echo a lot of the sentiments expressed by Dr. Haynes, and I wanted to sort of follow your opening remarks because I just read an article that was in the most recent UC Irvine UCI magazine that features you, Dr. Haynes, and I get the magazine because I was a grad student at UC Irvine, and so the article was really interesting, and it's, you know, as I'm sure you know, Dr. Haynes, it's about the UCI Center for Medical Humanities, and it caught my attention because of the ways that the article points to the crucial relationship between health and having compassion for the humanity of others. And the article highlights the importance of suffering or grieving with other people, and, you know, grieving together, and particularly for people who are in the position of treating or taking care of someone who is ill or unhealthy. And so that was very resonant for me when thinking about 2020. That convergence of the focusing on how we take care of other people, their livelihood, their health, you know, specifically within the pandemic, if we're thinking about health, but then also, you know, connected with the larger communal sense of grieving and loss, that occurred last year. And so, and I also think of 2020 very much as being a part of a series of years that really led up to last year. And of course is now leading up to where we are now in 2021. So there's been an evolution from, earlier than 2018, but 2018, 2019, 2020, and, and so on. At the same time that I recognize that this is part of a series of years, it's, I definitely felt the gravity and the tragedy of, the level of loss that occurred in 2020, and and this sort of shift in awareness among larger groups of people who had previously been unwilling to see what we as Black people have long known about the precarity of this sense of safety and the illusion of fairness in this society. So one of the areas that I focus on in my work is film and media representation. And I also thought a lot about the role of the media over the last year, how the images and narratives from last year, but also beyond that, have contributed to, on the one hand, the collective grief that that I think we experienced, and then but also the widespread reckoning that many people also felt last year. And and I've thought about the question of which images and narratives have been emphasized in telling this sort of story of 2020, and but also which ones have been marginalized. And that's always a question that's on my mind. And thinking specifically of focusing on the way that the tragic murder of George Floyd happened and how that was circulated, and how that certainly did spark this more widespread awareness from non-Black communities, while it also, among Black communities was grief and anger that's all too familiar, and it's not new at all. And so, thinking about 2021 moving forward and beyond that, and when I think about the idea of hope, which was a part of this conversation, there was an essay that I remember reading last year in 2020. It was written by author and poet Jericho Brown, and I'm going to quote it a little bit. He writes, hope is the opposite of desperation. It's not as comfortable as certainty, and it's much more certain than longing. It is always accompanied by the imagination, the will to see what our physical environment seems to deem impossible. Only the creative mind can make use of hope. Only a creative people can wield it. And that's the end of the quote. But when I think about this, I really think about the role and the power of Black art and film to really, be a part of taking what's in front of us, and going beyond the limitations of what seems to be possible. So drawing from the anger, the grief, the tragedy, but also a holistic picture, and drawing from the joy and the love that we don't see represented nearly enough among Black communities, and and using that experience to push the boundaries of what seems possible in the current environment. And so, I think that Black art and film in particular is really essential in expressing and representing the wholeness of experience. And it's just one of the outlets and routes for envisioning and enacting, something beyond what the current reality is.
I'll go next if that's okay, Ruth. Thank you to my brilliant scholars. So I'm just a humble pediatrician. I think a lot about kids. I think talk about hope. I work with kids because they're creatures of hope, right? And they're also our commitment to hope, to make things better. I agree with the sentiment about continuity. Before I get to the pandemic, I just can't get Ahmaud Arbery's smile out of my head. And so honestly, Mr. Floyd has changed the world, and I've not seen this level of sustained commitment at organizational levels. I agree. But it was Amy Cooper in Central Park, the white woman who, called the police and just knew, like Ava DuVernay said, she knew she would be believed, that she could use the police as a weapon like that. And I just think we have learned a lot about ourselves collectively. And we live on different planets, but it's been of deep concern to me about whether white folks are going to be able to live through the shame of a true reckoning at how savage they've been while they're calling other people savage and beasts. But I do see a little bit of pulling back the covers over the history that defines Amy Cooper, including from that was illustrated in Birth of a Nation, right? That just, I'm sure she'd never seen the movie before, but somehow she got the script embedded in her that this is my go-to. And Mr. Floyd's death, and yeah, it's just been good to watch white folks talk amongst themselves. That's also what's different this year. Usually folks are coming to us for that relief and that dialogue. I feel like white folks have somehow figured out, we got to leave them alone. They have enough to worry about, and we need to talk amongst ourselves. I will say too, the pandemic was another opportunity for us to learn about ourselves as a nation. Somewhere in there, I realized, I started asking the question, how did we create a nation where if kids don't go to school, half of them won't eat? How did we create a nation where for that percentage is in the 70s for Black, Brown, and Indigenous kids? How do we do that? And we don't see that every day, right? That something as simple as closing the schools for physical safety, oh no, you can't do that. Kids will starve. When did we do that? Did we talk about that? That's the way we were going to do things? Of course, not to mention, again, a reminder, I guess I knew somewhere that 1 out of 3 folks on Navajo Nation doesn't have running water. And that led me to do the research. There are 2 million people in our country who don't have running water. And of course, Black folks are disproportionately affected. And even just safe drinking water, the greater the percentage of Black and Brown folks in a community, the more likely they are to have that communities to have unaddressed water quality issues. And then of course, there's this deal with the internet, right? Like how in the world were our kids supposed to compete when their only source of the internet is on mom's phone, unless the library is open, right? And we're talking about the folks who cheated to get into USC and how competitive our educational system is. And we're several times as likely, our kids, not to have access to the internet, just in a basic sense. So for me, I am like Cornell West says, a prisoner of hope, even as I'm spouting these statistics. So it's been a tough year. And I will point out in the last week that a brother was walking across the street, minding his business, and the police needed to know why, and that ended in his death. And that deep sense of sadness of, when will folks get, it's people turning around in their cars, it's people going out of their way to police the lives of Black folks.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I really appreciate all of these thoughts and these comments. And I would just like to add that I am but a humble psychiatrist, and sorry, I couldn't resist. But I think that these points are very well made. 2020 was an extremely transformative year. And I don't think that it is accidental that, we talk about 2020 vision, and we talk about seeing 2020, and that's like seeing things perfectly, because I noticed that it seemed like vision was made clear for a lot of people. Things that we have known for a very, very, very long time.
That's good.
Have become very clear all of a sudden to many people who could not see it before. And I think it's very frustrating for the people who have seen it all along. But I think it's also necessary. And so, Dr. Jan is asking why, how did we get to a society where kids have to go to school in order to eat? Very abruptly and bluntly, I can say we got there specifically because we designed society to be this way. The society that we exist in works exactly the way it was designed to work. It works so that Black people are not able to be successful in educational settings. They are not able, they are under the oppressive boot of structural racism. At every turn, it is impossible to be successful. And we all know that, we experience and exist in that space, but all of a sudden it became clear to other people for the first time that this is how we exist, and that the system is very clearly designed to benefit a very small number of advantaged people who generally happen to be white men, at the expense of all other people, in which the system disadvantages. And so then we saw that play out. We saw that play out with COVID-19. As soon as we started hearing the data about the inequities in COVID-19, of hospitalization rates, of diagnoses, of deaths, this was not surprising. I don't think anybody was surprised by it. And in fact, I was not surprised that the original thought was, oh, this must be some sort of inferiority that this particular population has. That was the first and normal thought that we all always have. And it's different now, because the one thing that I started to notice is, while that was the original thought, and that was even expressed by Surgeon General Jerome Adams, you have to do this for your big mama. You have to change your behavior in order to not catch COVID-19. All of a sudden, people started to understand, wait a minute, we have these frontline workers that are working in jobs in which they have to go into work. They have to sustain their families. They have to live. And if they try to do those things, there's no options, and they're going into settings in which their safety, their ability to have personal protective equipment, their ability to be able to socially distant 6 feet away from each other is not an option. Those protections aren't given. And those are the reasons why we see these higher rates, not because people are making bad choices or that they don't care about their family or these diseases. And all of a sudden that narrative that's been in place since the beginning of time started to shift. I think it was a combination of the ongoing deaths of Black people at the hands of police, unarmed Black people at the hands of police, or just the unarmed Black people at the hands of everyone, connected with this idea of this COVID pandemic. And all of a sudden, the trauma that our community experiences on a day-to-day basis was somehow made visible to other people. So I think of 2020 as a year in which our vision, our collective vision as a society was improved. And what I hate about that is that it required so much more of the regular pain that we all experience, so much more loss, so much more. It compounded what we have already and always experienced. So as I move into 2021, I'm just very hopeful. I'm just very hopeful that we will begin to feel some sort of true desire to really do the work to dismantle the systems and structures that have gotten us here collectively as a society. And I believe I see some movement in that place. I so appreciate what Dr. Baker said about media and the importance of media and film and art. And I saw this incredible documentary on HBO called Black Art in the Absence of Light. And it was beautiful, and it was talking about how effective Black art has been, how wonderful it has been in kind of lifting up our community and sustaining us. But at the end of this documentary, it memorialized several people in the documentary who died of COVID. And it hit again. We've had to endure so much loss in order to, and it's what we do, it's what we experience. We have the resilience and the ability to endure it, but it's just a lot, and it's too much sometimes. From a mental health perspective, it can be overwhelming.
And that, that specific way of thinking about 2020 and vision, I don't think I've ever heard it said in such a clear way, the sort of 2020 vision, and the way that last year made it just impossible for a lot of people who previously had been able to kind of put blinders on, or kind of block what was happening right in front of them. And 2020 just made that impossible to do. And so, I really appreciate that sort of, metaphor.
I do wonder what people do with that knowledge. I think in some sense, Black people, we have to continually reconcile living in this paradoxical world, day in and day out, right? And I think I don't want to undermine the importance of people becoming aware, but I often wonder about, well, what exactly are they becoming aware about? How do they see their relationship to Black communities, to Black people? And how do they see themselves in relationship to these structures that are producing these outcomes that Dr. Shim, you rightly pointed out, the system was built this way. And often you hear it's overwhelming, right? I'm sort of paralyzed with inaction because I just don't know where to start. Well, how would you like to live like that every day?
There you go.
Okay. And so the language of reckoning, the language of change, I guess I'm still somewhat skeptical, but I do remain hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'm very skeptical as well. Extremely skeptical. I don't trust this, and I felt for most of the last 6 months of 2020, I felt this really strong desire to act as much as possible in what I felt to be a tiny little window that I expected to close at any moment. And in fact, I found that I was pushing myself past the point of my own health and my own wellness, because I said at any moment, this focus and this attention is going to go away. And what are we going to do at that point? We'll go back to where we were. So I agree that, and I still believe that. I still believe that window is going to close. It still hasn't closed, but it is starting to narrow. I feel it narrowing as we move into 2021. And so the question is, what are we going to do? And how are we going to move into this space? It's challenging. It's a challenging thought. And I have felt that one of the things that's been very important for us to take stock of is that we know that empowering communities and giving our community power, it has been probably one of the most effective ways to make the change. And we've seen that in the elections. We've seen that in organizing the election system in Georgia. It is about empowering communities, and it is about fighting against those structures on a broad scale. So then it feels like then if we're asking what is our first step or what action do we need to take, the first thing we need to do is figure out how we can transfer power more effectively to the communities so that they can do the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about progress too. So I'm the granddaughter of an AME minister from Charleston, South Carolina, and my grandpa was president of the NAACP in Charleston in the 40s and 50s, right? During the voting rights, struggle for voting rights, literacy tests, poll taxes. He graduated from Boston University, where Dr. King went, in 1925 with a master's degree, and was a Pullman porter, put himself through school as a Pullman porter. I never met him, but my mom says that he used to say, I'm not working for me. I'm not going to see these changes. I'm working for my children and my grandchildren. And I get goosebumps every time I say that, because that's me. And I think it's good to mourn and grieve. We are fabulous people of such adaptive genius. And then we have to go back to work. We have to find a way to go back to work. I just think about, him as a presiding elder going out into the rural low country of South Carolina. He could have been lynched. He was beat up outside of his church, which was at the time Morris Brown, although he pastored at Emmanuel in Charleston, where the 9 were killed. And that's where his funeral was. So I think, stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn has died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. It's not fair that it has to be so hard, that we live on different planets. That I just finished a training yesterday. Jan, the way you say you're worried about your son, I never have to think that way. I never have to think. I'm glad you know for today. It's incredibly grinding. And I feel like we got to keep moving forward. I remember my dad, when Barack Obama was elected president in 2008. And this is a man who was son of sharecroppers in Western South Carolina, and went on to be a school district superintendent and retire that way. But just his stories that I know must have been there, but he did not tell us. And the only way I knew they were there is because I read Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, right? And just a couple of phrases here and there, I'm remembering my mom and dad saying, I wish they were here so I could ask them more about that. But I asked him, how'd you do it through? I mean, I don't know how many people my dad saw lynched. I don't know. But that generation saw that, right? And he said, well, we always had hope. I'm like, man, that just seems rough. I'm like, dang it. Can't we get something like a sweatshirt or something? I'm like, a rope or not a rope, actually, strike the rope. Something more than hope to keep us going. And I just don't, besides the privileged us, I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's coming.
I resonate with the point that you made that we, in some sense, are privileged in a lot of ways, both in relationship to the generations that came before us, to many people who live among us in this world.
Yeah.
And I think what I hope for is that, at least in my lifetime, the University of California can enroll more Black undergraduates than are Black people incarcerated in the prison system. What a lot of people don't understand is that we do a far better job of incarcerating Black people. 1/3 of all inmates in the California correction systems are Black. But we've never been able to enroll more than 4% across the 9 undergraduate campuses.
Wow.
Right? And so I think we can aspire a bit more. If they can spend twice as much to incarcerate someone, shatter their families, hollow out their communities, surely this great public research university that lands rockets on planets can figure out a way to raise the enrollments and improve the graduation rate of Black students. And so I guess,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I just think that's such an important point, right? And again, it's a perspective and a view that we don't take or we don't think about on it. We're moving through our lives and we don't think about this. And I'm thinking this can't be that difficult, right? From my perspective, it starts very young. As a psychiatrist, I see children being traumatized. That trauma comes from the fact that they have parents that are incarcerated, that they have that residential segregation has set up systems in which they grow up in neighborhoods where they're exposed to trauma. They're exposed to a situation in which their neighborhoods have been disinvested in. They have no, the structure is designed to set these children on a path in which, instead of supporting them through the educational system, we funnel them through the juvenile justice system. And it very much seems like it is the responsibility of the University of California to interrupt that cycle. And it does not feel like it would be that hard to put some strategic investments in place to change that pipeline, the school to prison pipeline, to the school to UC pipeline. It seems like a very easy starting point. So I'm so glad that you bring it up, Dr. Haynes, because it is an easy starting point for us to make an intervention and for us to make a commitment as a UC. And I think now that we are a system that is headed by a Black man, I think, when we have, Black leadership at many of our UCs. I think this is a reasonable starting place for how we can begin to make really tangible change.
And I was, in relation to the last points that were made, I was thinking about something that I was just teaching this week, and in one of my film classes, I was teaching about the LA Rebellion. It was a group of Black students in the UCLA film program. Around 1960s, 70s. And so this was a program that at the time, prior to the sort of the group of students that was known as the LA Rebellion, it was a program where there were, really not many students, not many Black students. And then, around the sort of period of the 1960s and, all of everything that was happening, civil rights and, everything going on there was this significant change and, very noticeable increase, so that there was this, substantial community of students, of Black students that were a part of the program at UCLA. And it continued, for a certain period of time. There was this sense of urgency. It happened, and then it's sort of like there was a change, but then things tend to kind of go back to the equilibrium. And, as Dr. Shim, you pointed out, there's this, it's by design that things end up the way that they do. And so I think it's, it's something that, as you mentioned, it can be done. It's easy to be done. And so it's a question of whether there is an interest, and a real interest in doing what can easily be done.
Seems like it's easy. I don't know that it.
Well,
I think when all the systems are aligned, like the same thing that you said, Dr. Haynes, about systems being designed, or I don't know if that was Dr. Shim. People say that about the public schools. They're not broken. They're working exactly how they were created to work. They're actually fabulously successful. So moving that system as just one of the systems. But I see it happening. I see it happening, right? When Eric Holder and Barack Obama said, look, we're not going to investigate your school district. We're not coming and looking for you. But if we receive a complaint about disproportionate suspensions, we're coming. All over the country since 2014, suspensions have been decreasing by the hundreds of thousands. That's how many days of school. I calculated it once. That was more effective than the chickenpox vaccine for saving days of schooling. There's that, and there's also this initiative, Ethnic Studies for All, where California is to require at least one high school ethnic studies course for graduation. I don't think that's too much to ask. All you got to say is January 6th. People are misinformed, and I just, forgot my thought. Hold on just a second, because it's right there. Suspensions and ethnic studies. So we know that ethnic studies in high school for our kids, Black and Brown Indigenous kids, results in higher graduation rates, higher GPAs, more units at graduation, more AP classes. It's gonna be tricky, because I think, oh my gosh, it's just egregious how slanted the system is. If you look at just internet access alone, but other things as well. Who goes to school hungry? And even for middle class and upper middle class kids, what are those institutional messages that you're receiving about yourself, your potential, and about your position in society? And what are other children, what messages are other children receiving about what good Black folks do for the system besides employing prison guards? It reminds me, I said this before, it reminds me of policing during slavery, and you actually just hand these poor white folks this career of policing. And it reminds me of prison guards now, bless their hearts, but that's a high school diploma for a lot of money. You know, mandatory overtime, not mandatory, over $100,000 a year. So the same history is happening where you've made it lucrative for folks to not dismantle the system. In fact, that's the way it was built, right? And to have this buffer of white folks at the throats of people of color who are protecting this group of wealthy white folks who, for some reason, the poor white folks think they have something in common with.
You know,
Need some history, Chancellor Hayne. We need some history. We need some chemistry, like on Medea. We need some.
I'm gonna use some numbers. That's always scary when a human has used numbers, but this is important. And I want to give you an example of how seizing this moment can be consequential. One of the single most powerful ways to increase the number of applications from Black men and women for graduate study is to make the GRE optional. This year at UCI, several departments adopted that in part because of COVID. In programs that made the GRE optional, there was a 40% increase. Now, if you took that increase and monetized it in terms of outreach, marketing, right? Just hand wringing, that would translate into millions of dollars of effort, right? So what it demonstrates is that Black people are interested in graduate education, right? And so we know, and the College Board admits this, it doesn't concede it, it admits this, that the GRE is a weak indicator of degree completion. After the first year, it gets weaker and weaker. We know that the single most important factor of success is having a research experience as an undergraduate. Right? We know this. And I think one of the most important, challenges to build momentum from this year is to convince our colleagues that the GRE is a barrier to transforming the professoriate of the future, right? People say they get it, that they're personally committed to diversity, that, the students, when they get admitted, they don't come. How about putting a pause on the GRE? Just for an experiment for 5 years. We see the same thing when it comes to undergraduate applications, by the way, across the system.
Well, we're gonna see that, right? Is the SAT is no more, right?
but they're suspending it. But my point is, this year for students applying for fall 2021, the overall number of applications from California high school students and transfer students who are Black has gone up at least 20%.
And I will just tell you, you can, again, structures and systems work exactly the way they were designed and intended. So you can take any standard, you can take the GRE and you can substitute any standardized test in for that. You can say the same thing about the MCAT, the exact same thing about the MCAT in schools of medicine. So the medical college admissions test. And Ibram Kendi spends a lot of time talking about how standardized tests are structurally racist by design. They are set up that way. We use them specifically to keep people from entering into systems of higher education. That's how the test was created. All of those standardized tests were created by people to keep advancing and advantaging certain people and to prevent certain people from coming into these types of institutions. So you could do the exact same thing for the MCAT, you could do the exact same thing for the SAT, for the ACT, for the GRE.
For the
The question becomes, are we truly committed to doing that? Because I know what you said, Dr. Haynes, you said that we could save so much money in outreach, but I actually think that there is this element of performative work that we do where we say that we want to change these things. And I'm saying the collective we of society, but we say we want to change these things. But it's much better to put a bunch of money into doing outreach programs. It's much better to, rather than address the structural problem with a policy change, to do this performative work in which we say that we care about diversity and we're trying to do this, and we see no change, no improvement, no consistency, so that we can keep the demographics exactly the way they are, because ultimately people are very invested in keeping the demographics where they are, very, very invested in that. And so part of the work has to do with, we know what policy, we know that we can make policy changes that will lead to these outcomes. Do the people that that have the power to make these changes truly want to see the results of these changes? And I don't know if we are committed yet, as an institution or as a society. I don't know if we have fully committed to that. I think that at institutions, when you start to see an uptick in the number of people of color and the number of Black people enrolling in institutions, I think the powers that be get very, very nervous. And you start to see, with progress always comes retrenchment. And so you will see lots of work to dismantle any progress that we make. And I think we are not always prepared to fight the retrenchment that always comes as we think about progress. So I think we could get rid of the GRE, we could get rid of the MCAT, we would break down barriers, and we would have people coming into the institution, and then we would have a whole number of new policy changes and institutions that have been created to make the space inhospitable to the population that comes into that space. And so it's a constant vigilance that we have to have.
And you know what? Removing the GRE is consistent with the state constitution, right? You can do that. So for 25 years, since the adoption of Proposition 209 that prohibits consideration of race and gender in admissions and employment in state institutions, including higher education, we have 25 years of experience to know that race neutral benefits everybody, but only harms Black people. Okay, that's why we haven't recovered the overall percentage of Black students among the undergraduate population since 1995, right? We know that. and Proposition 16 went down a defeat, if you needed another reminder, right? And if you look at who voted for it, it should be pretty clear. Everybody did, right? Everybody did. There was only 2 counties that had majority support. Whether you look on the coast, inland, there was very little traction. And so now is a time where essentially we either will tolerate and really understand what to expect, or we have to get far more creative throughout the pipelines, not just at the point of applications, but what are we doing to support not our students to get by, or our career staff to get by, or our faculty to get by, but to thrive, right? So I guess I'm taking the position that that anti-Blackness is an existential threat to the University of California. In other words, we can't be that great public institution that we say we are if we tolerate this stuff. I mean, we weren't a slave state. We weren't a part of the Confederate States of America. We weren't a part of the Jim Crow South. But if you look at the numbers, there's not a whole lot of difference.
And I just want to point out that I grew up on the East Coast, and most of my childhood and professional life was spent in the South. And what's been so interesting for me to be here at California and to be in the UC system is how many people really cling to this identity that they are not racist, that they are not anti-Black, that Californians are not anti-Black. And I have to tell you, there's not a lot of difference between the same, maybe there's a difference in the presentation, but the actions and the behaviors are the exact same as in Georgia. Right, as my time in Georgia and my time in Virginia, these are the same outcomes. California is not immune, the UC system is not immune. And in fact, I think it can be even more damaging because in California and in the UC system, we have this concept of aversive racism, where people believe that they are not racist when they actually are. So they're actively racist and have a very strong belief that they are not. And all of the data shows that that can be even worse, that more damage is done when you have poor insight into your own racist beliefs.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to put in the chat box an op-ed I wrote in December, where I'm calling on the state of California and the leaders of the post-secondary educational systems, the community college system, the California State University system, and the University of California, to create a compact for higher education for Black people. And last year was the 60th anniversary of the master plan that sort of created this multi-tiered system of higher education in California. There's not a single reference to race or Black people in that document, right? And so I think that we can do this. We can do this, but we have to say the name. And it has to be a compact between the state of California with Black residents for Black people to thrive in California post-secondary educational systems. We're not. We're not. Whether you look at the community college system, the CSU system, the UC system, it's really quite staggering, right, when you think about it. And at the same time, the state keeps incarcerating people. And in fact, Black women are among the fastest segment of the growth of the inmate population. Right.
They're 5 times as likely to be suspended as white girls. And that for just in general, for Black males, it's 2 to 3 times. Black females, 5 times. I mean, that's where they're created, right? Right? That's where they're created in secondary school. That's where their identities are formed. That's where the identities of your future teachers, principals, lawyers, physicians, professors. What you got to say, Professor Baker? What you got to say? What you doing? I don't want to talk over you.
Well, hi again. And so, no, I really think that what Dr. Haynes said about how we need to be creative. There was some point when you used that kind of phrase, and I think that that's absolutely true. I think from just sort of getting rid of standardized tests, that's one. I think that would be one important thing to do, and to really just go even further than that, and really kind of get rid of or dismantle the ways that we think about intelligence and what it means to be a UC student, and really break that down, and even going down to going to elementary school, and just changing, and just, I mean, it really there really has to be just such a widespread change and a huge transformation as far as how we think about intelligence, and and what it means to be an inclusive society, and and really get people to question the idea of the supposed meritocracy, which I think is a really I think that people who benefit from that, they don't want to get rid of that. They're really clinging to the idea that this is a meritocracy because it helps them feel better about their success. And so, so that's that's certainly not a simple thing to do. It can be done, but I think it just goes back to that question of whether there's an actual interest or willingness to make the changes that that will really shift the way that that the UC system looks, and what the students look like, and and really would make waves in other areas of society as well. But yeah, I think just that idea about being creative and really thinking differently about what we're prioritizing and what we value in the society, and as as students.
So here's where I need to jump in, because it's been a really wonderful, powerful talk, but I also want to be mindful of the fact that we give folks in the audience, and thanks to those of you who have stuck around, give them a chance to pose some questions to this wonderful group that we've assembled. And I know we had a couple of different ones because the conversation went to so many wonderful places. So I'm going to take a step back. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, I would just ask that we plug it in the Q&A section. But one question that arose a while ago, it was about being mindful of the closing window of opportunity that was referenced earlier, and the notion that political capital might be a renewable rather than a fixed resource. And how can we capitalize on the moment in a more sustainable way? What if empowerment and power is a self-replicating capacity, not a zero sum? And so I think it is just a question of how can we keep this movement renewable? Because like many of you, I saw a lot of statements come out from everyone. And I know at all of our respective campuses, we saw them too. And there were calls for action, Black Lives Matter, and that was great. But it's also a question of how can this be sustained over the long term? And if you have any insights related to that, I'd be curious to hear. I know that we've all been kind of grappling with that the last few months, but I would love your take on that.
I've had the privilege of being asked by our chief nursing officer at UC Davis Health to, he's a relatively young man, Toby Marsh, but he asked me to come in and do some anti-racism training for his nurse leaders. And he said, sure, I'd love to have our frontline nurses trained, but I need to do the leaders first, beginning with the executive team. And I will be in the training for the executive team. 3 days, 3 full days. And he pays his people to go to the training. I've been so excited about these spots of leadership, kind of between generations, where folks are saying anti-racism. That is a new thing, people of Earth. For whatever you think, white fragility wasn't being talked about before. We still can't say white supremacy, but we can't expect too much of the people. But I've been really encouraged. And so Dr. Haynes, once I get folks in the room, we can talk about how white folks were deprived of opportunity because of standardized tests, right? During the eugenics movement, right? And how they were actually labeled as feeble-minded. And folks appreciate that history. Stay tuned for if it makes a difference in quality of care and diversity of the nursing workforce. But I've had fun working with a few leaders who really want to make a substantive, sustainable commitment to this. So that's 100, almost 120 nurses, groups of 15 over 8 months. That's been a substantial investment of time, taking them away from their workplaces. And I'm going to highlight his leadership, because I've been waiting for 30 years. Because guess what? It's mandatory. Guess what? It's tied to your employment evaluation. You got to have an excuse about why you couldn't make time in 8 months to do one of these trainings. Yeah, let me just stop there.
I want to, in response to the question, for the momentum, to address the momentum, how do we sustain it? There's 3 things that have to happen in order to advance 2 crucial conditions. Those conditions are, you need to create change management while creating a movement, right? Because all this, the change that we want, is voluntary. We know that the voters of California aren't going to do it for us. The legislature aren't going to do it for us, right? So we have to find, recruit, and educate people who want to go to the next level. And then use the sort of levers at the campus to make changes where we can. To do 3 things: change the culture, organize the universe, the culture, in terms of confronting anti-Blackness. It's the hardest part.
Well, I agree.
Right? And it has to be grounded in, grounding accountability and understanding. So you can't ask people to be accountable for something they don't even know or understand.
Okay.
The second thing, leverage the research and teaching mission to advance understanding about the Black experience and drivers of well-being. I guarantee you, if you went back to your campuses and asked how much research is being done on Black people and Black communities throughout the enterprise, no one will be able to tell you. But that has to be done. As a public research entity serving this state, we must leverage the capacity. And I think the third thing is engage with Black communities throughout the state. We need to demonstrate that these universities, the best in the world, are producing research that benefits them, that we're educating their children, that they're going on to not just careers in the professions or in higher education, but working. And you have to just do that. And it's I'm not trying to be glib, but they've done this for other things. Why can't they do it for us?
I totally agree, but I have to tell you, as one of these people that does research on Black people, who's had to do that research kind of in coded ways, because people don't fund research on Black people, just so you know. It is very difficult. You have to talk about social determinants, and you have to talk about all of these other things that are much more palatable for your work to be funded.
Yeah.
But what I have come to understand, or what I think the thing I think is driving all of this, is that we're spending a lot of time saying these are the policies, these are the things that need to change. But fundamentally, from my perspective, when you drill it all the way down to the bottom, our personal beliefs or our societal norms about people drive the policies and the laws that we create in our society.
Mm-hmm.
And so if our leaders and people in power have a fundamental belief that this particular population is not worthy, is a disadvantaged population, is naturally inferior, is not a population that's worth being invested in. If that is the fundamental core belief of the people that have power, then they pass laws and policies that confirm that belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we operate in a system in which all of the policies we work in reflect that belief, that fundamental belief in the inferiority of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And so what has to change is that the people in power who set the policies have to fundamentally believe that Black people are equal to other people and worthy of the same advantages and worthy of the same benefits in society as other people. And then have to be set upon the route of reversing and changing all of the disadvantages, breaking down and eliminating all of those disadvantages that have been put in this population. And I will just say that leaders that we need to do this work, it's very hard for a Black person in a leadership position to do this, because if they start to do this work, they become targets. A target comes on your back, and while you're just trying to function in your role in leadership, you will be taken down. It's one of the reasons why President Obama was not particularly successful at advancing issues that related to Black people in this country. He would, if he had started doing any work in that space, he'd have been impeached. They would have found something. So here we are in this state where the work that we have to do is, I actually think I've seen the most progress happen, and even in my institution, when somebody in a position of power, who is often a white person, has the belief, the true fundamental core belief that it is important to elevate Black people and believes in justice and believes in righting systematic racism and goes about doing that work. And they do that work with the support of communities of color and the support of Black people. But oftentimes they can change these policies that we think are immutable. They find ways around fixing these things that we believe are there's no changing them. They're the written policies of our system. And somehow they find a way to change these policies. So the work we have to do, I think, is create a culture within the UC system where there are more people in power who fundamentally believe in the equality and the equity of Black people in our society, and the fact that we have work to do to fix the structures in our society that have harmed Black people to this point.
And I just want to say a little bit, and that's, and I absolutely agree. And that's why, that's where I think, the ideology of people in the society is so important, and things like the images, that we're constantly surrounded by, and the narratives and the stories and the messages, they can and often do serve to reinforce the idea of the inferiority of Black people. And so, so I think that, Dr. Shim, as you mentioned, the policies, can only go so far, because as we've seen over and over again, there's a policy change, and then people figure out a way to work around that or create a different policy that has a very similar result. And so, so there, I think that, changing policy is not unimportant, but it really only goes so far if as you mentioned, there's really this basic ideology or basic beliefs haven't changed. And I think in a sense, it's even harder to change. It's harder to change the ideology and the sort of cultural beliefs. But but I do think that I think it's possible, and to sort of, come to that theme of hope again, I think that there is the possibility of, and I think that, for me, I definitely turn a lot to the work of Black artists and filmmakers, and in order to see images that don't reinforce that sort of particular idea, narrative, or story about Blackness.
Do you see hope, Professor Baker, in shifting that ideology among young non-Black people using film, music? I don't know, y'all, but I was like, wow, look at all them white people in the street. Look at all the Asian people. Look at all there are more of them than there were Black folks out there, because I wasn't going out there. And
I do think that, when we're thinking about young people, I think that that's probably the best way. If we're going to reach them, I think that's the best way to do it, through music and film. I really think that's the best way to reach young people.
mm-hmm.
Another question that kind of goes back to this, idea of like leadership. So what more can we do to try to recruit and retain Black leaders on campus in pivotal, high-level decision-making positions? I got my thoughts, but Dr. Jan, why don't you
let's
go?
hear it. Let's hear it. No one knows it better than you. You just face that lack of accountability, right?
Well, I think it goes beyond recruiting, because the thing that I always say is, what are you doing to take care of the people that you have here? What are you doing to take care of the people once they get here? You can recruit all you want, but if they're leaving at a, the same rate or higher rate that you're recruiting them in, what is that doing? It's doing nothing. You're just actually traumatizing people. So we have to look internally at the UC at how we're treating people who are coming in who are leaders or who have potential to be leaders, and make sure that we're taking care of them first, and then we can look to start bringing more people in. So that's just my thoughts, but I'd love to hear more from the panel about that.
I agree. I think internal accountability about the employees you already have is really important. And I can ask you, who are you mentoring? But at the end of the day, where are they in the organization? How long have they been there? And what's the downside to not moving people at the same rate other folks are moving, even faster if you think diversity is valuable to have higher levels?
I agree with both those comments. And I just want to add that I think it's important to show the data. I think one way that people get habituated to seeing no Black leaders is that no one's counting. 0 actually is a number, right? And I think it's important for people to confront that longitudinally, right? That there may have never, ever been either a Black man or a woman in a position of authority. And people need to know that. And, in some sense, if you see a bunch of zeros, one could interpret that to mean, hey, is there a rule against hiring Black people? Because it looks like there is.
Come on, Sharon.
Okay.
Yeah, I was sharing with Dr. Jan not too long ago that, for a couple years in my department, I was the only Black person. And the only reason we had 2 is because I hired the second one, or that there were only 4 Black managers in a population of 400 staff. And it's not that we were the only qualified Black people to have ever worked there to be managers. It's just this idea of there's a ceiling, you know, talk about like the glass ceiling for women, but there is oftentimes a ceiling at the UC for Black people. And it's almost impossible to get beyond that. It takes someone else who is Black sometimes being in a position to open the door for you.
Yes.
Or as in my case, I had to partner with a white woman who, like Dr. Shim was saying, sometimes it's, oh, we can't change it. It's always been this way. And it takes someone who is not Black to say, well, wait a minute, well, why can't we change it? And to kind of put up the fuss, because sometimes if we do the fuss, then we're looked at as angry, you know, not cooperative, not willing to collaborate, all those things that they like to say about us. So yeah. So it's a really interesting phenomena. But even that to say that now that I've left, now they're back to just one Black person in that department. But no one seems to think that that's an issue or be concerned about it. And I think that's oftentimes for me, what is so frustrating is that they, even though we say like, you know, kind of the vision got cleared up and they couldn't put the blinders on, I think there's still a lot of blinders on out there. It's just at this high level, we're about DEI, we're about anti-racism. But when you start to get down into the layers of it, you get into the units, you get into the departments and the divisions, it's not translating in that way.
Sharon, I like to tell people the closer we get to equity, the harder it's going to get, because it's going to get personal. And I'm telling you, cannot justify choosing your girl or your boy. You just can't. And I agree with you. That's why I'm making you a case study, girl. Everywhere. How does that happen that we lose you? Okay, don't get me started.
But I'm back to this, what I find to be the most frustrating thing about operating in these systems, which is the performative diversity work. So, you know, we have awards that I've been in every system I've ever been in. There is awards that are given out for diversity to institutions that have all white men in leadership positions. And they're given awards for being the most diverse organizations. And we set up these systems and we say, oh, let's congratulate all this great diversity work we're doing. But none of that diversity work is actually leading to the change that we need to see. And so we spend a lot of time patting ourselves on the back for this great work that we're doing that's leading to absolutely no change in the system that we need. So you know, I did a little bit of consulting for a department around their diversity outside of the UC system. And their leadership team was all white men except for one woman. And I said, you know, your leadership team needs to be more diverse. And the head person was surprised by that statement. He was of the belief that they had a pretty diverse leadership team. He did not see this as a problem. And so if we're starting at this place, where the standard can't even be agreed upon as to what is a reasonable number of Black people in leadership, then we're going to have problems. We're going to have problems in then trying to reach those goals. And I look at my institution and I say, there's not enough Black people in leadership roles at my institution. There's work that needs to be done, but I can guarantee that there are plenty of people in leadership at my institution that feel that it is a very diverse set of leaders running that institution. So there's a lot that we have to do to change people's understanding of the standards of what we're looking at.
What we're looking at. Sound like just what we're looking at, girl. Don't get me started.
I guess I would add one point before we move to the next question is that with the diversity piece, we hear a lot about diversity, but I think a lot of times we hear about diversity, but it comes at the cost of equity and inclusion. And I think that's part of the bigger problem is that the numbers, that's one side of it, but how welcome do people feel? How comfortable do they feel? And do they feel as though they actually have an upward mobility in that system? Because over the past year, I've had a chance to meet a lot of people throughout the system, and they're amazing folks. I've met wonderful professors, wonderful staff members. And the one question I have when I see them is, how long are they going to last in this space? Is it going to be a situation where there's actually a pathway for them to actually advance? And I don't have the answer to that right now based off of what I've seen so far. And so I think if we're going to fix that one piece, we're going to talk about that. We have to also be mindful of the equity and inclusion. So I do know we've ran quite over, so I do want to be sensitive to that. And so before
Dennis, I'm so sorry. Can I make just one really, really quick comment before we finish? Thank you so much. Okay, I just wanted to say I recommend this book, Diversity Regimes by James Thomas. And it talks about this concept of when we're thinking about diversity, some of the reasons why we're not as effective is because we dilute what we're looking for, right? So when we talk about diversity, we talk about all these different things. And it's not to say that these things aren't important. It's not to say that LGBTQ populations aren't important. It's not to say that diversity of religious beliefs are not important. But when we kind of put all of those things together, it dilutes the piece that I think we are trying to focus on, which is Black people in positions of power. And when we equate everything in the same space, those people cannot, we're losing the target. There's much work that needs to be done around Black people specifically in leadership roles. And if we start to think about diversity as including lots and lots of people into that umbrella, we're missing that piece. So I don't want us to take our eye off of that prize. That's all. Sorry.
Very important point. I appreciate you mentioning it, and I also appreciate everyone who stuck around for the talk. I know we've gone a bit over, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. And in the interest of giving everyone time to eat and enjoy their weekend, I'm thinking we could close it out, and we'll move to some closing comments from everyone. But Dr. Shim, since you had started, I'll give you a chance to add anything else you may have.
I'm done. I said my piece. I'll move along. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for that. Okay, up next, why don't we have Dr. Baker, if you have any closing thoughts.
Oh gosh, I mean, there was so much to this conversation, but yeah, I think that what Dr. Shim said is so much of a barrier for getting to true inclusion and actually having, having more Black people be a part of the UC system and lots of different spaces, is that I think there's the performative aspect of it and people wanting to not seem not racist, and it gets in the way of making actual change because it would involve admitting that there is a problem, and I think that that's a big barrier to address.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Haynes, if you have any closing thoughts, we'd love to hear them.
I'm going to share with you the single most dangerous idea: Black thriving.
And thank you for that. And we know that that's some serious work happening at UCI. And for those of you in attendance, if you haven't had a chance to learn about the Black Thriving Initiative happening at UCI, please be sure to check it out. I've been aware of it for months now, and I think it's a great model for where you could go within the UC system. So I'll be very curious to hear where it goes over the next few years. Dr. Murray Garcia, I'm going to cede the last word to you.
This is in my blood, and for better, for worse. And so I sometimes I tell them, the medical students and the nursing students, I know this is hard what you're going through. I know it's really hard. Don't hear me say it's not hard. It is not as hard as it was for our ancestors, okay? So, and it shouldn't be, but I'm just saying, and I feel like, I feel like we gotta find a way to keep, you know how the football players, they may not have the ball, but they push the one with the ball over the line, the first down line. Just appreciate you all so much, and what you're doing. And I have to stay a prisoner of hope till it's over. I have to stay a prisoner of hope till it's over.
Wonderful way to close it out. And I guess on that note, I want to just give my thanks to you, Dr. Murray Garcia, Dr. Shim, Dr. Baker, Dr. Haynes, for not just taking the time to connect with us, but also share your insights. I recognize how difficult it can be carrying the mantle of leadership, but we appreciate that what y'all are doing, not just for your own campuses, but also for the UC, but also for the state. So I appreciate y'all giving us 101 minutes past work hours to chat a bit, but it's been really wonderful, really enjoyable. So thank you all. And thank you to those of you who decided to come and hang out with us. We hope you enjoyed it. This has been recorded, so we will work on making that available to all of you. This will be the first, but not the last of many Black at UC events. And
Great.
we appreciate all of you. And we hope that y'all have a wonderful weekend. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
Thank you
you.
all. Make sure you connect with us, Black at UC, LinkedIn and Facebook. You don't want to miss out.
Will do.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.